I love that so very much. Those of you watching on Cover 3 just got a great dose of our latest animation here for the silly season, the coaching carousel. Before we get to more from Texas A&M and some of the other changes from Monday morning, it's exactly what we called for. We joked about it. We said, all right, if Mississippi State opens Sunday, are we going emergency pod? It was Texas A&M, not Mississippi State. Of course, we went with it. Bud, you're the first one that brought it up on Saturday night, so I'll let you get first word on this. You have always hinted at a short leash for Zach Arnett from the moment that they made the promotion. You have discussed the difficulties of a defensive coordinator taking over an offense and a roster that was built for Mike Leach to be able to run a classic Mike Leach style team, and did so with some good success at Mississippi State. So when you look at what's happened on the field this year, how much of the different pieces, whether it's short leash, whether it's scheme and style, whether it is personnel or even some of the performance, what do you think made it easy for Mississippi State to be able to go ahead and make the call here to move on from Zach Arnett?
Sure. So just pulling out some of my notes from the preseason and really since the announcement that Arnett was going to be the interim guy and they promoted to the full-time guy, I think Mississippi State had their doubts about him from the jump. The contract they gave him indicates as much, right? It's essentially just a long-term interim contract. The buyout is basically nothing. There's a full offset in there. And if I was Mississippi State, I think I would have fired Zach Arnett as soon as he made the coaching changes that he made, right? If the idea is that we have the tragic passing of Mike Leach, okay, and we're going to try to keep the band together, we're going to try to minimize the down vibes. Arnett knows the program. We have a really, really experienced roster coming back, 20 senior starters or whatever the crazy number was this season. And then he's like, yeah, that air raid stuff we've been running? Screw that. We're going to run toughness, run game, move people out of the way at Mississippi State. I think Mississippi State should be like, dude, you just don't get it. Okay, you're Muschamp 2.0. And he was, basically, except the defense also got worse, which was a problem. I just think he was an unqualified hire and would not have gotten the job had he not been the interim with, again, the tragic passing of Mike Leach. So if you basically promote a guy who's not really qualified for the position, it's pretty easy to fire him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was an impossible situation. Like, the way that the job came open is a tragedy. And then you're in a situation where you don't really want to be conducting a coaching search while all this stuff is going on. So you kind of just, I don't mean it to sound this way I'm saying it, but you just kind of grab the guy who's there and like, all right, let's get this done with and let's go into the season and we'll evaluate from there. Like, hey, maybe it works. Like, the odds of it ever working were very, very low because you went over, Bud. You can't change a team's entire identity in one off season. Typically, if you've got time, if you're doing it on the time frame that they were trying to do so, it's even more difficult. So it's like, that was the reason I was down on Mississippi State going into the season because, yeah, they had a lot of returning experienced players, but they had a lot of players who were experienced in a completely different style of play than what they were going to be asked to play this year. So it was really kind of like pounding square pegs into round holes, and we have seen the results. It hasn't been pretty. Defensively, statistically, they have slipped up a little bit compared to what they were doing last year. The recruiting is not going in the right direction. It's like there really is no significant reason to keep Arnett. If you're Mississippi State and you want to trust that he's going to get it turned around, odds are he won't. And odds are at this time next year, you're doing the very same thing, except now the hole you've been, thrown into has been a little bit deeper and harder to climb out of, especially with Texas and Oklahoma joining the league. Yeah,
the impact of conference realignment is it just creates urgency. Whether it's stated in these discussions or whether it's just sort of understood, you're looking around and Texas and Oklahoma greater than you. Okay, so what can we do to make sure that we're not going to create even more of a deficit right there? Do you think, Tom, Mississippi State is a program that in the future SEC should be setting its expectations on being able to regularly make bowl games?
That should be the goal.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard to get there. It's already hard. I mean, I think obviously the landscape of this sport changes, but for the most part, it stays the same, like in the long term. And I think that there is a lot of recency bias in what we view this job as. What Dan Mullen did at Mississippi State was not the norm. This was not a team that was used to having those kind of successful seasons year in and year out. Most of the time, Mississippi State was a doormat in the league. It was the one team where you looked at on the schedule, you were a fan of any other team, you're like, that's a win. Like when you were trying to add up the wins to find your trip to the bowl game. So the success that they didn't really have after Mullen left immediately under Moorhead was not a surprise. So then you bring in Mike Leach, who is another all-timer of a coach who starts, having success, and you lose Mike Leach, you kind of revert back to what you were. So it really depends on the hire. If you make a grand slam hire that turns out to be exactly what you need, then yeah, your expectations can be, let's get to go bowling. Let's maybe every once in a while we get it perfectly aligned. The stars all aligned. We have a veteran roster, the right coaching staff, and everything works out, and we really have a special season. But I mean, in 6-6 and 7-5 is probably, where you're hoping to be in coming years.
And that's assuming that the SEC does not go to a 9-game conference schedule. If they do, then we're talking more 5-7, 6-6. Because for a team like Mississippi State, that's a problem. Their cross division every year is what, Kentucky was? Yeah,
it's about to change, and I've got some thoughts too on sort of like where they stand in, because all of that is about to shift in terms of, you could argue Mississippi State's about to get easier if they go to a division-less format.
Yeah, but if you don't get Kentucky every year, that means you're getting Georgia and Florida and Tennessee more often than you used to. But agreed, you don't get LSU and Bama every single year. You also won't get Arkansas every year. You won't get Ole Miss every year, right?
Yeah, you will. You'll get Ole Miss every year still.
Or you should be. You will get Ole Miss every year. Apologies, yeah.
If you don't get Ole Miss every year, there are going to be riots.
I don't know. It's a really, really tough job, right? If you take it, you will be rich, right? Especially if you're one of these guys coming from the G5. But that is an important decision through which we have to view this job, because I know there are guys who are good coaches right now in the American or the Sun Belt who are having to sit down and say, hey, this probably ends in failure, right? The odds I fail are a lot better than the odds I succeed, but I will come away making about $25 million guaranteed, which changes my life, and it is generational money. Job versus program. Mississippi State is a good job compared to almost every other job you can have in the country, right? Maybe CEO of Apple is better, obviously, but you will be crazy rich. Can you actually win? Can you level up from there? It's really hard to do. Mullen did it, but also Strickland was his boss at Mississippi State and then took him to Florida. So this is a really tough job, man. This is one of the programs that I think conference expansion really hurts. Okay. Now, if you're an athletics administrator at Mississippi State, you love it because the checks get bigger and you're making even more money. But fans don't root for balance sheets. Okay. The average Mississippi State fan who goes and tailgates, his fan experience is not better because the assistant AD makes 110 as opposed to 70. Right. And that's kind of what happens here because you can't spend the money on the player. So all that said, if we do end up going salary cap in 5 or 10 years, my thoughts on the Mississippi State job change a lot. But at present, this is a really hard job.
Since 1961, do you know how many top 20 finishes in the final poll the Mississippi State football program has?
5, and 4 of them under Mullen.
Got to be more than that, right?
No.
7? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Was that right?
Yeah, no, it's 5 or 6. I've got 1 year here where we don't have, we don't have the coaches, but you do have the AP. It's 17-0, but that would be in 1980, 1981, old Emory Ballard years. So yeah, we're either talking about 5 or 6. We're talking about a program that since 2000, once we've moved into our SEC West and SEC East, they finished second in the SEC West in 2014 under Dan Mullen. Nothing else has been better than tied for third, and they only did that 3 times since 2001. I mean, you are constantly, and even if we do realign the divisions, you are just constantly running behind at minimum 3 to 4 teams that you're recruiting against, 3 to 4 teams that you're going to be battling against. And you know what? Actually,
14 teams out of 16. The only team that Mississippi State can reasonably have an expectation of roster better is Vandy.
Wow.
But
Even
they will
when
always
you've
have
got-
the first team ranked #1 in the college football playoff rankings era.
Even all right, so to go back to Dan Mullen peak years, he at least had evaluation down. I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it was the defensive side of the ball too. I mean,
They
there
had
were
good players.
dudes. There were really good players on the defensive side of that ball for Mississippi State team as well. It wasn't just Dak. It wasn't just the way that the offense was built around him. Yeah, it's a tough one.